So Malcolm Offord, leader of Reform UK in Scotland, thank you very much for talking to the Scottish Sun. As part of our pre-election chat with every leader, we're doing everybody. We'll kick this off. It's your first election, and it's also arguably Reform UK's first serious election campaign in Scotland as a serious contender. How's it been? How have you found it?
I've found it really enjoyable at a personal level, and I think our candidates are enjoying it. You know, I think at the end of the day, as has been mentioned many times before, most of our candidates, 80% of our candidates, have not been full-time politicians, so they are new to this. So they bring a sort of real-life experience to this. They're all bright people. They're all motivated to do something which is quite a daunting thing to do, put your head above the parapet. But we also bring a sense of fun and perspective with this as well. You know, we enjoy going out and meeting people, talking to real people. And I think that's one of the strengths of Reform.
Do you think Scotland's political parties in general have forgotten how to discuss things with normal people on the doorstep? Do you think there's that? I mean, that's your big selling point, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's this disconnect between politics and Scotland.
There is. I mean, these are professional politicians, and there's sort of a groupthink that's going on. There's a Hollywood bubble, no question about it. There's even a language which is developing where I can listen to some of these people speaking for a minute and I don't actually know what they've said. Mm-hmm. It's like a word salad.
Like what? Can you give us an example?
It sounds very... I mean, if I listen to Mary McCallan talking about housing policy, after a minute, I don't actually know what she's done. Other than set up a quangle.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's very polished and very articulate.
Is that kind of jargon first, Scotland second?
Yeah. I mean, it's not how normal people speak.
Sure. I think it's fair to say you maybe struggled in some of the earlier debates. Yeah. I know some of your rivals have privately admitted you've improved. Do you feel yourself that you've grown into the role of leader over this election period and in the campaign?
Well, I've only been the leader of this party for, 3 months or so? And so I've got to learn fast. But I was a crammer for my exams.
Right.
So I like a bit of pressure. I like a deadline.
So you like last minute? I
like being put under pressure. If you want something done, put me under pressure. And I also like the idea that you can learn fast on the job and get better at it. So just putting aside the politics of it, the process, I've enjoyed the process of learning how to interact with you guys, how to deal with the media. I've never really done that in frontline before. I was
going to say, because your previous job as a Scotland Office Minister, you were shielded from us for a lot of it.
Absolutely. And in that job as a Minister of State, as was a Secretary of State, a Minister of State, your job is really to mop up behind. And it's very much to promulgate the message, to make sure the policies are understood. The front line, I worked with Anas Sarwar, who was a very, very effective Cabinet Secretary, probably the best that I worked with. And he was very effective on the front line. My job was to be in his slipstream, so I wasn't in the front line. Yeah.
So if we look at the polls at this election, we were talking about them off camera, but it looks like you're in a fight for second place with Scottish Labour and Anas Sarwar. At this point, we're a week out today. How confident are you that you'll secure that second place, or do you think you're more likely to finish in third?
Yeah, so that's a tough one to call because it has bobbed around a wee bit. I think on balance, in the last couple of weeks, it looks like we're pulling ahead a little bit. But as you say, these polls can be quite erratic. All I can really judge on this is going around the doors, there's a lot of disillusioned Labour voters. And at the moment, they're saying, I'm not going to bother voting. So it'll be down to whether Labour can get their vote out. They've traditionally had a strong ground game, and there's a tribal Labour vote. Is this an election where that is fracturing? I mean, just think about it. The idea that Labour would even come third in Scotland, Scottish Labour coming third in Scotland, is an extraordinary concept. So they'll be working very hard on that.
Well, what's your feeling about the level of Reform support? Because there are, we talked to people in Labour and some of the other opposition parties as well, and the idea is that there's a lot of undecideds, as you say, a lot of people thinking about staying at home. This is something that could look like a turnout election. That also applies to your vote, given that you're banking on a lot of people who've never voted before coming out on May the 7th.
Yes, it's interesting because Reform, the way I describe Reform is not so much a party, but more a movement. It's a movement of ordinary, decent, hard-working Scots who are fed up. It's becoming a party. I think that the first wave of Reform voters were people who really got the Reform message. Perhaps the second wave is those who are protesting. against the status quo. We're now into the third wave, which is we're now actually winning the arguments, and we're getting people to come to vote reform with some enthusiasm, saying, I'm going to change my vote to reform because I now believe that this party is serious about change.
Sounds a lot like the SNP.
In terms of?
In terms of how they grew from nothing or very little to a serious power.
Interesting, okay, interesting. Because, yes, okay, fair point, because they did have their bedrock base, didn't they? That was one thing that Salmond was very good at. He moved that bedrock base up. There was a certain amount of protest against Westminster, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And then by getting that to 45%, he got people enthused, didn't he? What is interesting is from his, I mean, he was the most brilliant politician of his generation. And when he handed over to Nicola Sturgeon, he'd got them from basically 25% to 45%. He was entitled, wasn't he, to say to Nicola, you now take it from 45 to 65. And I think he must have been very disappointed that they never did that.
But are you looking at him and the SNPs, maybe in the turn of the century since devolution, right at the start of devolution, as the model for where reform go after this?
I've never thought of it that way, but I do admire him as a campaigner. I also admire that he did have ambition for Scotland, and he did make an economic case for Scotland. Isn't that interesting that Nicola abandoned the economic case? She actually used words that was to say she wanted a welfare economy, not a wealth economy. He would never agreed with that. And interesting, John Swinney recently has ditched that language. He's trying to ditch now this idea of the welfare economy. He's now adopting our language of economic growth.
Well, let's talk briefly about, again, going back to your chances in this election. It would be quite extraordinary for you guys to win a constituency. It's looking like Banff and Buchan in the northeast is potentially the most likely to be the breakthrough. How confident are you that you can, give someone a bloody nose on the constituency ballot, even though I know that most of your focus is in the regions?
Yes. Look, I think there isn't a single pollster that says that Reform will win a constituency. What they're saying is that if we have 20% of the vote, that might translate into, say, 20 seats, all of which will come through the list system. Fine. I have to say I'm more ambitious than that. And we now know on the most recent polling that we're in a winnable second place in 22 of the 73 seats. Surely, with a week to go, that is our opportunity. And is this one of these things where the dam might break? I don't know. There's a bit of a domino effect. It may just be it takes one to go and the rest follow. Who knows? But my personal ambition would be to win constituencies.
Let's talk a bit about the STV debate the other day. You hit the headlines after that for what a lot of critics say is a boast about your 6 houses, 6 boats and 5 cars. I think they would say that you're hardly representative of the working class you claim to represent. Do you not think voters will balk at that sort of boast on TV?
This is the thing that the middle class don't understand, that the working class are just as, if not more, aspirational than they are.
So you think that's you going to them, look, I've succeeded.
Yeah, you can.
Look at what you could do.
You can too, absolutely. And I've had a huge amount of feedback, positive feedback. I mean, look, that was a risky thing to do, and I did it quite deliberately because I wanted to get a conversation going in Scotland about the Scotland that you want to live in. Do you want to create wealth in Scotland? Do you want to be successful? What sort of society do you want? And the juxtaposition of me standing beside Ross Greer, and I'm saying, this is what I've achieved. Do you want more people like me? And he's saying no. And then he's turning around and saying he's giving his list of freebies he wants to give away for free. And when he's asked who's going to pay for that, he says, I'll tax the rich. But in the previous sentence, he just said he doesn't want any rich people in Scotland. It's la la land. And I wanted to expose that, and I think I've been able to do that.
Do you believe John Swinney when he says he wants people like you in Scotland?
I think he's saying that through gritted teeth. I think this is the challenge again that I've laid down to all the parties. You can't just keep saying words. Economic growth. What does it? What does that mean? What we're trying to do is increase the tax revenue, the pie that we have, the size of the pie. We're trying to increase the tax revenue so we can pay for public services.
We'll come back to that. But while we're on the topic of your cars, we revealed this week that you'd failed to pay your car tax on the. I think we said it was a £40,000 luxury Range Rover. Do you want to pass on the rest of your registration details to us? We can check the rest if you'd like.
No, but I can assure you that, I mean, back in the day, wasn't it good when you had a tax disc on your window and it told you the date that you had to get
It's not that hard to check, Malcolm.
Right? Now, look, that was just an oversight. I missed that, and it won't happen again.
Which house did the letter go to?
Yes, okay, fair point. I missed the letter. Fair point. Anyway, I was absolutely mortified. I got it fixed immediately. It won't happen again.
What are your other cars?
Well, I like classic cars, and one's already known about because Christine already talked about it. But I have a lovely old E-Type Jaguar, which is a 1971.
What about the rest?
V12. That's for another. That's for another day.
Go on. What about the rest? You've exposed yourself to having several.
Fair point. So I have an old Land Rover Defender because I love old British
classic
cars.
off-roader.
Yeah, classic off-roader. And then I have 2 vintage Rolls-Royce Corniche.
Wow, they're not cheap.
Well, they're vintage, so they're not. They're not cheap, but they are. But in comparison to what you'd have to pay for a new one, they're more affordable.
Which one's your favourite?
The E-Type is just phenomenal. Yeah. Driving around, that's one of these cars that if you can get on the open road up in the Highlands, driving between sort of 13, 15 miles an hour, that's where you put through the gears. It's terrific.
So careful not to say that you speed on those roads.
When legitimately on the speed limit and open roads. So.
Let's move on. Let's have a look at your manifesto, which came out really early in this campaign. Feels like a distance away. Your headline policy here is a cut to income tax, bringing that below the rates in the rest of the UK eventually. I mean, that's a massive, massive cut to government funding, isn't it?
No, 2 billion out of 72 billion.
That's huge.
That's 3%.
Yeah, but that's the same as the funding to the Scottish Funding Council. It's more than the total budgeted for rail services. It's twice the cost of running every prison in Scotland, the 300 million more than the amount of money spent on our police. It's massive. It's
3% of a Hollywood budget of 72 billion. It's eminently achievable, and it can be provided, it can be paid for without cutting frontline services.
That's not what either the Fraser of Allender or the IFS say. The IFS say it's not credible. Yeah. The Fraser of Allender say there's no evidence that the economic growth you talk about would support it.
So the IFS is not an independent think tank. That's the first thing to say.
I mean, it was, you say it's establishment, but it was set up by people like by you in opposition to a Labour Party budget.
But it's 75% of his money comes from the government. There's only 16% it gets from independent
set up by
money.
A banker, an investment trust manager, a stockbroker, and a tax consultant.
But where it is now, though, what it's become, it's just become part of the establishment, okay? And there's no establishment thinking around cutting taxes. And yet, actually, every time that happens, it drives growth. So what I've thrown out there is this concept. At the moment, our economy is just anemic, okay? It's growing at 1% per annum. Right, just one additional 1% per annum, can generate an extra £8 billion of tax revenue. So what you're doing is this is an investment. It's money down in order to get more money back. And remember, what we're trying to do here is just grow the size of the pie.
But Malcolm, the Fraser of Allender, the IFS, I know you say then they're establishment, but these are respected independent economists. The Fraser of Allender says as far as raising revenue, it's a non-starter. But you're conning the Scottish people with this claim.
No, I'm not, because people know that if you everybody who goes to work right now knows that they're paying too much tax. It's a common theme of everyone I speak to. They're paying too much tax, and they're changing their behaviour because of that. Okay, so you've got these ridiculous 6 tax bands. You've got people, middle earners, being dragged up into higher tax bands. You've got nurses at the moment being dragged up into higher tax bands. And it's not just the fact that you pay, if you work an extra shift, you pay more in tax. It's also the fact you get other benefits withdrawn, right? So sometimes your marginal tax rate is 80%. Mm-hmm. So you work for an extra £100, you only keep 20 quid. Nobody's going to do that. So we know, for example, in the NHS, that nurses and doctors, this is happening a lot with consultants, are managing their workflow to make sure they don't get trapped by these, right? So if we accept that, and we accept it in the private sector, everyone's paying too much tax, and I say, if you were given some more money back in your pocket, what would you do? They immediately say, we would work harder.
You're a businessman. The fundamental mathematics of cutting even 3% of a budget, particularly a big one like a £68 billion budget, that requires savings somewhere. It doesn't pay for it.
But that's what I'm saying.
Itself.
As a businessman, every time I do a hustings with the SMEs, the small business owners in Scotland, and bear in mind 99% of the companies in Scotland are SMEs, I ask them, if you had to cut your costs overnight without affecting your revenue line by 5%, put your hand up if you couldn't do that. And then no one puts a hand up. Every year, the Scottish government in Holyrood bullies the Scottish local authorities, the councils, and demands that they cut their budget by 5%. All we're doing is Pac-Man turning it back, sending it back to Holyrood, and saying we're going to cut your budget by 3%.
I mean, you want to scrap every single Quango, by the sounds of things, saving 6.5 billion. For the benefits of people watching, that's every single NHS board. It's Police Scotland, it's the Crown Office, it's every inspectorate, every commissioner, it's the Scottish Funding Council, it's ScotRail, it's every tribunal. That's just not serious.
So let me finesse that, because that's not actually what I said, but I can see why that becomes the headline. What I've said is that forget the money for a minute, because there's two things to this. Forget the money for a minute. There's a democratic deficit here. There's a problem with how we're running our country. We've got too many arm's length bodies, okay? We've got 23,000 civil servants working in 132 Quangos and 29,000 civil servants working in the Scottish Civil Service. They should be combined, and it should be, because ministers should be accountable for what's going on. What we're getting is ministers in Holyrood standing up and saying, oh, it's not my responsibility because it's a health board, or it's the Scottish Water, I can't do anything about it. So we've got a situation where we've bifurcated our public services that nobody's accountable. No one gets fired for anything going wrong. So that's so my assumption from a political point of view, we get rid of them and bring them all back into the civil service. Okay, but the second thing is that they are what they are, and some of those are not going to be taken away. When I say my presumption is they all go until they prove to me why they should stay. So I would do an exercise with them in the first 6 months and say, explain to me exactly what you do, why you do it. And a good number of them, probably 75%, that will probably be absolutely fine. But we think there's probably about 25% that are surplus to requirements, should be rationalised, should be cut down. And we think out of that 6.5 billion, there's 1 billion that we think we can save out of the 6.5 billion.
That's the same number as the SNP say, isn't it?
Well,
they don't want to cut Quangos to the same degree you do. That
is their number. Remember, they're on the inside. We're on the outside looking in. Mm-hmm. We don't have all the information. It's difficult to get. You can't press a button and get the 6.5 billion out. It's very difficult to get transparent numbers out of Holyrood. Sure. Right. The second piece is that there's a whole lot of money being spent on net zero nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll come on to net zero, so right. we'll get there if you.
Okay, but staying on the Quangos, how interesting though that we've identified that there's overlap. We hear this from people all the time. Sure. I talk to small businesses, who just complain about these Quangos coming in, overlap everywhere, waste everywhere. But now the SNP are now talking about cutting the Quangos. Didn't Anas Sarwar say something about a bonfire of the Quangos? He was talking about a third of the Quangos, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. Right? We think looking at it is about 25%, about a quarter of the Quangos that are surplus to requirements, and we think we can get $1 billion out of that, which is half of the $2 billion I need to find.
You mentioned earlier about growing the pie, the tax take pie. I'm intrigued to know, there was some National Records of Scotland statistics out this week. You might have seen that predict or project a drop in drop in population in Scotland from about 2034 onwards, due to a reduction in migration in the last few years. That means fewer taxpayers, less money for public services, and due to the nature of our ageing population, higher health costs. That is the fundamental structural problem facing Scotland going forward.
Only on the basis that you run the current Scotland for the next 10 years.
So what's your solution?
The solution is very straightforward. We make work pay more. Mm-hmm. People are limiting the size of their families, can't afford to have any more kids. And second of all, we got 800,000, 750,000 adults economically in.
Well, let's do a rundown of that figure. So you say 750,000. Yeah. Of that, 122,000 are retired, 185,000 are students, 124,000 are looking after family, 267,000 are long-term sick.
So these are the numbers from the ONS Labour Survey. We've gone to a different source. We've got a much more reliable source than that. We've gone to
the ONS.
Well, when's the last time the ONS put out anything that was reliable?
I think every single day they put out statistics.
ONS is continually updating their numbers. We've gone to DWP on this. DWP, we've got a different data source. So it's the Fraser Allen Institute. They cite the figures taken from the ONS UK-wide labour force survey, which suffers from a small and shrinking sample size and a subsample for Scotland. We've taken our data from DWP's meticulous welfare records, accessed via their Stat Explore data hub, right? So there's no double counting. And these show the labour force surveys dramatically underestimate the number of people out of work in Scotland. So my figures are that there's 752,000 economically inactive people in Scotland aged 16 to 64. And if we take out those who are on incapacity benefit, that results in 638,000 out of work. 600,000 people out of work. That will
still include students and early retirees.
No, not including students. This is from DWP, because students are not getting money from DWP.
They might be.
Right? So the reality, and I've got a conservative estimate, I'm saying 400 to 500,000, call it 500,000. It's a conservative estimate. All I'm saying is there's a number of people here who've fallen out of the pathway to work, and they've been abandoned, basically. There's no program to help them back into work, okay? And welfare is a good thing for those who need it. Of course it is. We will always look after the vulnerable in our society. But it's not helping people, just parking people on benefits, especially when kids coming out of school, right? So I would like to put money into programs to get people back to work. On the surveys on a lot of those folks, a lot of these people do want to go back to work, but they've lost their confidence. They maybe don't have the skills. They need to start in starter jobs, entry-level jobs. Now, my point is, over a 10-year period, my ambition would be that right now we've got 2 million people working in the private sector in Scotland. My ambition would be to make that 2.5 million, right? That requires a lot of effort, but everyone will be happier and wealthier if they're working. The best form of welfare you can give anyone is a good job. If I achieve that ambition and get up to 2.5 million people working, and they're in better wages because we've got them into higher skilled jobs, in the things that we're really good at, we got about 10 centres of excellence in Scotland. We were world class. So we focus on that. We get our kids trained into that. We get, instead of 50% of kids going to university, they go to college. They do mentorships, they get apprenticeships. If we organise ourselves to 2.5 million people working in good jobs, the birth rate will go up.
So let's move on to net zero. You mentioned it briefly. You told ITV Border, I think in an interview potentially last week now, that your conversion from being pro-net zero to anti-net zero was because you had, quote, drunk the Kool-Aid. Can you explain what you meant by that? Yeah,
so I don't think I would ever say I was pro-net zero, but I wasn't anti-net zero, if I can make that distinction, right? When I came into government in 2021, I hadn't been in politics before. I'm a business guy. And generally, the perceived wisdom is that net zero is a good thing. I don't know, I have any reason to think differently. I'm now in a government, a Tory government, which passed a law in 2019 to make it legal. So they are all gung-ho on it. I go to COP26 and I meet a lot of people talking about how we can make this work. And then I've got our government position lines, which I'm prepared to say because that's the position.
So you said to ITV you were just reading the lines I was given.
Well, basically, I wouldn't deny that. That's a lot of your job as a junior minister. Obviously, if you don't agree with something, you don't say it. Right?
So are you now, as Reform UK Scotland leader, just reading Nigel Farage's lines?
No, because that's why we sometimes don't agree. Have you noticed that? Sometimes we don't agree, so we're not scripted. That is the wonderful thing about Reform UK. It's not scripted. The Conservative Party was scripted. I'll give you an example of that. Every weekend, as a minister, you would get given the folder of all the lines for the weekend. And I remember watching an interview with Rishi Sunak with Laura Kuenssberg. And because he was the brightest kid in the class, he could read it once and remember it word for word. And I took my folder out on a Sunday morning, and he basically spoke word for word what was in my pack. He was just giving the lines, right? We don't do that in Reform. We do not do that in Reform. So on that, I've been on a journey, and you're allowed to change your mind. That's what Maynard Keynes said, wasn't it? But when the facts change, you change your mind.
But right? Climate change isn't pretendy science, is it?
Well, hang on. We can argue about science or not science. Where I'm coming to this is on economics. Absolutely on economics.
So you're happy if in 50, 100 years the sea levels rise, parts of Edinburgh floods, you're happy for that to be your legacy?
That will not. That's just scare stories. That will not happen.
That's not what scientists say.
Look, that is not going to happen. Now, here's the thing. I spent a year in the opposition on the front bench of the Lords looking at energy. And I was given a task to look dispassionately about energy policy. And that is when I could not believe as I peeled back the onion, I couldn't believe what I found out.
Let's move on.
So that's why I changed my position.
Sure, well, let's move on.
And I'm much more informed on it now than I was then. So I'm much more prepared to defend what I'm saying now than I was then.
Let's be honest, we've only got limited time with you, Malcolm. But
just last thing very quickly on the climate change. So energy is reserved to Westminster. So why is Scotland, the SNP, spending $5 billion of their 72 budget on net zero?
Because that's devolved.
It's $3 billion of capital and $2 billion of revenue.
But it's within their powers.
And yes, but my point is these are ideological projects because the big lever is in Westminster. The big lever is in Westminster.
Net zero is devolved. They're just using the powers they have available to them.
And they've brought that forward, a silly target of 2045. Of the 13 targets they put out, they've missed 9 already. They're wasting money on this. So that's the other billion. When you see where's the other billion I'm going to get the $2 billion from, I'm going to get $1 billion from the Quangos. I'm going to get $1 billion from net zero nonsense.
Let's talk about immigration, one of your big policies. You say you want to restore the local connection rule, which is the idea that local people should have priority on accessing homelessness accommodation and social housing. Thomas Kerr, one of your candidates in Glasgow, said refugees, instead of being sent into these accommodations, be sent to rural army bases, which sounds an awful lot like concentration camps, which is what your critics have said.
No, they're not concentration camps. I mean, that's where the army were housed.
Yeah,
our soldiers were housed. These are not concentration camps.
Well, where are they? We don't have a massive stockpile of them.
No, we don't. We've sold a lot of them off, which is a great shame. The MOD should never have done that. But the reality is, these are not. You would never say to a soldier when they're in active service that they're living in a concentration camp.
They're there by choice.
Yes, but why would you conflate the two? That's not
because they're there by choice.
These are barracks, which are comfortable places, secure places with medical attention, with good food, with everything you need to do. Okay.
But you talk about this because
all he's doing is referring to the fact that they shouldn't be in our city centres.
You talk about this because of exactly that point, that they shouldn't be in our city centres.
Yeah.
So what stops them from getting on a bus into the nearest town?
Well, that's the whole point, is that these people shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be here. Okay.
Even if they're here legally?
They're not here legally.
Even if they've had asylum?
They've come here illegally, and then they have been through a dubious process in the Home Office to stay. And the reason why Glasgow, with only 1% of UK population, is now housing 6% of UK asylum seekers is because of this local connection and priority need thing.
Sure.
Word has got around, and I've met some of these folks and spoken to them direct, who've paid to come here illegally, come into England, wait for a year to go through a dubious Home Office process to get right to remain. And then the word gets around, go to Glasgow, you get free, cheap board and lodgings. You get priority in Glasgow, right? That is not fair. And you know what? This morning, I was in Castlemilk, highlighting the fact that the local police station is shut down. I bumped into a local chap just walking down the road, and he said, "Are you for me?" I said, "I saw you on television, we had a chat." I said, "What's the biggest issue?" He said, "People here, look at these people here, families with 2 or 3 kids, can't move houses. The people arriving here have been given priority in the housing." I did not set him up to say that.
That's a supply issue, isn't it? That's the lack of housing.
Yeah, but I did not. And these people, I could tell immediately, he's not racist. I'm not racist. We're not. It's nothing to do with race. This is to do with, we've got limited resources in housing, in health. There's a bunch of people arriving here illegally, right, who are getting put to the front of the queue. That is fundamentally not a Scottish concept. We don't do queue jumping in Scotland.
Okay, so, I mean, you personally being portrayed as a massive racist, almost a National Front type threat to Scotland by the likes of the SNP and Scottish Labour.
I've never heard that. I've never ever been compared to National Front.
It's the rhetoric that's being used. This idea that you're
look, that is lazy. That is lazy language. And when I'm accused of that, I know that I've won the argument because they won't talk to me about the reality of the situation. When John Swinney calls me a racist, he knows deep down it's because he's lost the argument. When I say this sentence, that Glasgow is at 1% of the UK population, it's housing 6% of UK asylum seekers. That costs £55 million a year in temporary accommodation alone, and that is equal to 15% of Glasgow council tax. I say to you, what in that sentence is racist?
Well, it's not for me to answer.
There's nothing in that sentence that's racist. I didn't mention anybody, where they come from. I don't care where they come from. Don't care who they are. That is not fair on that man in Castlemilk who can't move his family into a bigger house because he's been pushed down the queue by people who've just arrived. He's paid tax all his life. He's paid his tax. He goes to work, pays tax all his life. He's at the back of the queue. That is not fair. Nothing to do with racism.
I mean, one of your candidates, Senga Beresford, said or certainly agreed with a statement where we should deport all Muslims. That's just naked racism, isn't it?
So that tweet, if you look at it very carefully, was relating specifically to Sharia law. Do we want Sharia law in our country?
It says, in the UK, Muslims are demanding that Sharia law is implemented. I demand that we deport the lot of them. Who's with me?
And I've asked Senga about that.
But that's not what you said. You said...
It's about Sharia law.
No, that's about deport the lot of them. Doesn't matter if they...
In relation to Sharia law.
Deport the lot of them.
In relation to Sharia law.
That's not what it says.
And I've asked Senga, I've quizzed Senga on that, and when she posted that, she, in her mind, and of course this is the danger with social media because it's done too quickly and it's too... Language is important, but things, you know, you can see there's some ambiguity there. As far as she was concerned, she was responding to the idea of Sharia law coming to the UK. And that is a question, a legitimate question that we should be asking ourselves. Do we want Sharia law in our country when we've had 1,400 years of our own culture, basically based on the Judeo-Christian system of laws that have provided the whole bedrock of our society? Are we going to bring in a different legal system? I don't think so.
So what about candidates supporting Tommy Robinson? Senga Beresford again retweeted things in support that were supportive of Tommy Robinson.
No, she wasn't. It was purely, that was only in relation to grooming gangs, and it was to say that she wanted that the political establishment were dragging their feet on grooming gangs. She would say that she should not have posted anything in relation to Tommy Robinson. She would apologise for that. But again, in her mind, she's thinking, you know, this, as a mother in Dumfriesshire, that she is concerned about grooming gangs.
Thomas Kerr said on the record that he's done good work on grooming gangs, Tommy Robinson. That's completely different to you saying that there's no common ground between Tommy Robinson and reform.
Look,
sounds like you're perfectly happy to have candidates talking about him.
That's one incident. And in that particular case, I'm not ever going to endorse Tommy Robinson, but the reality is grooming gangs has been an issue that the political establishment have been sluggish on.
But you've got to recognise, we did a story early on in the campaign about a grassroots group on Facebook, of which your activists were posting on and taking part on, that had racist, Islamophobic rhetoric throughout. This is your base of support, isn't it?
No,
they're just angry racists.
No, they're not. No, they're not angry. No, you know what they are? They're ordinary, decent, hard-working Scots in their communities, seeing that their communities are being disrupted, that it's not fair, there's no community cohesion. They are proud Scots that want the society we've generally had, which is always an inclusive and happy society. And they're fed up. And this thing has come at us like a train. It's only about 4 years that this has come at us. We're all struggling with this, okay? We're all struggling with this. The whole country's struggling with this. We have to deal with it. And we only deal with it if we talk about it. John Swinney doesn't want to talk about it, which is why he calls me a racist.
Last few questions we'd like to hear. You claimed in a TV debate that Anas Sarwar, I think you used the phrase, bounced up to you and said that you should work together to beat the SNP. He says that's a lie. Is it?
Well, he hasn't denied it.
Well, he calls you a liar.
He hasn't denied it.
He
didn't deny it on the TV debate. He didn't say that's a lie. You know what he did? He turned to John Swinney and said, don't believe that. He didn't say it was a lie. He hasn't denied it.
He's called you a liar repeatedly.
But that's up to him. That's up to him.
Is that not denying it?
That's up to him. Well, what he said, the way he says it. I know I'm not lying. I had a witness that heard it. Okay, so I know I'm not lying. I think perhaps I'm not going to deny being new to it. That was my first ever television outing. I was personally quite shocked at being on live TV and being absolutely attacked on a highly personal level by Anas Sarwar, and then coming in the green room bouncing up like a long-lost friend.
Why would he say it, though, given that one of your candidates has said they want to deport his children? That's his claim.
That's what I find so odd. That's what I found. That's why eventually he called me out 3 times. You know, first time I was pretty shocked by it. The second time I let it go, and the third time I said, I'm not going to let this go. This does not square with that. Why would you come bouncing up to me and say you're going to do well in the election? We need to talk about getting rid of the SNP. Why would you do that in private and then come out with this nonsense in public? It doesn't make any sense.
So, given that, if you had a straight choice between Anas Sarwar as First Minister and John Swinney, if you ended up finishing
third. But why would
third,
that be the choice?
if you finished third and Anas Sarwar was second, and you came to the end of the first ministerial vote pick, and it's a straight choice between Anas Sarwar and John Swinney, what do you say to your MSPs to do? Do you back one of them, or do you abstain?
We will cross that bridge when we get. I'm not trying to.
It's a reasonable question, Malcolm.
No, I always have you noticed I always answer the question. I mean, people say to me, you, Malcolm, you always answer the question. I don't give you a word salad. I always answer the question. On that particular one, we are new to Holyrood. We don't know exactly how this game works, okay? And right now, we are just completely focused. We've got 1 week to go on maximising our chances of success with the greatest number of MSPs.
It's a brilliant way of saying you're answering a question when you're not answering the question.
And so the question is, from a personal point of view, I think I find it difficult to know how we'd work with Anas after what's happened. And John Swinney, I don't want to support to be First Minister. So that's called being between a rock and a hard place, isn't it?
Well, who ends up in Butte House in that scenario?
Well, maybe it's not down to us.
It will be down to you, because of the nature of the voting system and how it's going to work. You guys are going to hold the balance of power potentially in the next Parliament.
Well, maybe that's a negotiation that'll have to happen then, and it'll be a dynamic situation, and we'll deal with it when we get to it.
But would you have your votes going towards putting Anas Sarwar in Butte House?
No.
Would you have your votes going towards John Swinney being in power in Butte House?
It may be that first of all, if he's got the biggest party, he's the biggest party in the government. I remember that. Didn't Alex Salmond do that in 2007? Mm-hmm. He didn't win a majority, but he announced him. Well, he was the biggest party. He just basically said, "I'm the First Minister."
Yeah.
Well, that would be a reasonable tactic.
He was put in Holyrood in Butte House as First Minister because the Conservatives and the Scottish Liberal Democrats abstained on the vote, and he got the backing of the Greens as well.
Right.
That's the question: is do you sit on your hands and let John Swinney walk back into Butte House?
Yes, that's a good one. I need to think about that.
You must have an answer, Malcolm.
We need to think about that. We'll work that one out when we get there.
So you haven't thought about whether or not
we've game played a number of scenarios, but I think there's going to be quite an interesting result next Friday. I think let's get through next Friday.
Is it true that what you really want, what Reform really wants from Holyrood in the next few years, I should say, is as much chaos as humanly possible, so that Nigel Farage has the best possible chance of becoming Prime Minister in 2029?
No, I don't agree with that, actually, because if you look at it from Nigel Farage's point of view on the longer term project, he wants to demonstrate that Reform is a party capable of governing in the UK, and a very good way of doing that is to demonstrate that Reform in Wales or in Scotland or in the city councils is doing a good job in those scenarios. If we're just a bunch of revolutionaries, that doesn't get him anywhere, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is that I know how the Parliament was set up. I know Scotland Act back to front as a former Scotland Office Minister. And it was never designed for one party to have a majority anyway, so it is designed to build consensus. What is interesting is that we were the first out with our manifesto. And all the themes in our manifesto are now being picked up by the other people. So perhaps there is consensus. So they're all now talking about economic growth. They don't all know how to do that, but they're all talking about it, and understanding is important. They're all talking about tax suddenly. Have you noticed they're all starting to talk about tax? Even John Swinney's talking about maybe rationalising 6 bands down to right? They're all talking about energy price being too high. They're all talking about immigration needs to be controlled. They're all talking about pathways back to work. That is my language. These are our policies. Okay? So actually, isn't it interesting that Reform is being accused of being divisive? And yet we have got the narrative on the 5 big issues that sort this country out, which is now being employed by the other parties. What does that tell you?
So who are you working with?
What does that tell you?
Who do you like the look of?
What does that tell you?
Of what people are saying?
So I think they need to decide who wants to come and work with us. They need to decide they should come and work with us because we've got the ideas and the energy and we're going to change it.
Who would you work with?
As I say, let's get through this, because I think it's going to be quite a different dynamic when we get through the other side. And right now, this whole election has been run on the basis of what happened in 2021. We are the new kids on the block. We are the challenger party. We are ambitious. We can't go into that parliament with having with a voter base that wants change and then just become part of the cosy consensus. We cannot do that.
Last question. You've got 20 seconds, as everyone else has had, to tell Scottish Sun readers why they should vote for you. And I'll be timing it. Because
Scottish Sun readers, I know, are proud working people. They get up in the morning, they go to work, and they're proud of doing that. And they're paying too much tax. They're not getting enough back in terms of public services. They feel all the basic things are going wrong, whether it's the potholes, whether it's ULEZ, they can't get to work. Working people can't get to work. We're on the side of working people. Sun readers should vote for reform.
I think that's one of the longer 20 seconds we've had. But Malcolm Offord, thank you very much for speaking to Scottish Sun.
Thank you, Connor.